Welcome back to Mr. Smoot's Story Time. Today I will be telling the story of Hansel and Gretel. It was written by the brothers Grimm in Germany in 1812, more than 200 years ago. The version I'm sharing today is from a book called Folk Tales Every Child Should Know, written in 1905. I hope you will enjoy listening to Hansel and Gretel. This is the story of Hansel and Gretel, a folk tale from Germany by the brothers Grimm. Near the borders of a large forest dwelt in olden times a poor woodcutter who had two children, a boy named Hansel and a girl named Gretel. They had very little to live upon, and once, when there was a dreadful season of scarcity in the land, there was not a lot of food. The poor woodcutter could not earn sufficient to supply their daily food. One evening, after the children were gone to bed, the parents sat talking together over their sorrow. And the poor husband sighed and said to his wife, who was not the mother of his children, but their stepmother, "What will become of us? For I cannot earn enough to support myself and you, much less the children. What shall we do with them? For they must not starve." "I know what to do, husband," she replied. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children for a walk across the forest and leave them in the darkest, thickest part. They will never find the way home again, you may depend, and then we shall only have to worry for ourselves." "No, wife," said the man, "that I will never do. How could I have the heart to leave my children all alone in the wood, where the wild beast would come quickly and devour them?" "Oh, you fool," replied the stepmother. "If you refuse to do this, you know we must all four perish with hunger. You may as well go and cut the wood for our coffins." And after this, she let him have no peace till he became quite worn out and could not sleep for hours, but lay thinking in sorrow about his children. The two children, who also were too hungry to sleep, heard all that their stepmother had said to their father. Poor little Gretel wept bitter tears as she listened, and said to her brother, "What is going to happen to us, Hansel?" "Hush, Gretel," he whispered. "Don't be so unhappy. I know what to do." Then they lay quite still until their parents were asleep. As soon as it was quiet, Hansel got up, put on his little coat, unfastened the door, and slipped out. The moon shone brightly above, and the white pebble stones which lay before the cottage door glistened like new money. Hansel stooped and picked up as many of the pebbles as he could stuff in his little coat pockets. He then went back to Gretel and said, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. Heaven will take care of us." Then he laid himself down again in bed and slept till the day broke. As soon as the sun was risen, the stepmother came and woke the two children and said, "Get up, you lazy bones, and come into the wood with me to gather wood for the fire." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "You must keep that to eat for your dinner, and don't quarrel over it, for you will get nothing more." Gretel took the bread under her charge, for Hansel's pockets were full of pebbles. Then the stepmother led them a long way into the forest. They had gone but a very short distance when Hansel looked back at the house, and this he did again and again. At last his stepmother said, "Why do you keep staying behind and looking back so?" "Oh, mother," said the boy, "I can see my little white cat sitting on the roof of the house, and I am sure she is crying for me." "Nonsense," she replied. "That is not your cat. It is the morning sun shining on the chimney pot." Hansel had seen no cat, but he stayed behind every time to drop a white pebble from his pocket on the ground as they walked. As soon as they reached a thick part of the wood, their stepmother said, "Come, children, gather some wood, and I will make a fire, for it is very cold here." Then Hansel and Gretel raised quite a high heap of brushwood and branches, which soon blazed up into a bright fire. And the woman said to them, "Sit down here, children, and rest, while I go and find your father, who is cutting wood in the forest. When we have finished our work, we will come again and fetch you." I just want to stop for a minute. I don't think she's going to come back for them, is she? Right, she told their father that she wanted to leave them in the forest. Let's keep reading and find out what happens. Hansel and Gretel seated themselves by the fire, and when noon arrived, they each ate the piece of bread which their stepmother had given them for their dinner. And as long as they heard the strokes of the axe, they felt safe, for they believed that their father was working near them. But it was not an axe they heard, only a branch which still hung on a withered tree and was moving up and down by the wind. At last, when they had been sitting there a long time, the children's eyes became heavy with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When they awoke, it was dark night, and poor Gretel began to cry and said, "Oh, how shall we get out of the wood?" But Hansel comforted her. "Don't fear," he said. "Let us wait a little while till the moon rises, and then we shall easily find our way home." Very soon, the full moon rose, and then Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and the white pebble stones, which glittered like newly coined money in the moonlight, and which Hansel had dropped as he walked, pointed out the way. They walked all the night through and did not reach their father's house till break of day. They knocked at the door, and when their stepmother opened it, she exclaimed, "You naughty children! Why have you been staying so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back." But their father was overjoyed to see them, for it grieved him to the heart to think they had been left alone in the wood. Not long after this, there came another time of scarcity and want in every home. And the children heard their stepmother talking after they were in bed. "The times are as bad as ever," she said. "We have just half a loaf left, and when that is gone, all love will be at an end. The children must go away. We will take them deeper into the forest this time, and they will not be able to find their way home as they did before. It is the only plan to save ourselves from starvation." But the husband felt heavy at heart, for he thought it was better to share the last morsel with his children. His wife would listen to nothing he said, but continued to reproach him. And as he had given way to her the first time, he could not refuse to do so now. The children were awake and heard all the conversation. So, as soon as their parents slept, Hansel got up, intending to go out and gather some more of the bright pebbles to let fall as he walked, that they might point out the way home. But his stepmother had locked the door, and he could not open it. When he went back to his bed, he told his little sister not to fret, but to go to sleep in peace, for he was sure they would be taken care of. Early the next morning, the stepmother came and pulled the children out of bed, and when they were dressed, gave them each a small piece of bread for their dinners, smaller than they had before. And then they started on their way to the wood. As they walked, Hansel, who had the bread in his pocket, broke off little crumbs and stopped every now and then to drop one, turning round as if he was looking back at their home. "Hansel," said the woman, "what are you stopping for in that way? Come along directly." "I saw my pigeon sitting on the roof, and he wants to say goodbye to me," replied the boy. "Nonsense," she said. "That is not your pigeon. It is only the morning sun shining on the chimney top." But Hansel did not look back anymore. He only dropped pieces of bread behind him as they walked through the wood. This time, they went on till they reached the thickest and densest part of the forest, where they had never been before in their lives. Again, they gathered branches and brushwood, of which the stepmother made up a large fire. Then she said, "Remain here, children, and rest, while I go to help your father, who is cutting wood in the forest. When you feel tired, you can lie down and sleep for a little while. And we will come and fetch you in the evening, when your father has finished his work." So the children remained alone till midday, and then Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, for he had scattered his own all along the road as they walked. After this, they slept for a while, and the evening drew on, but no one came to fetch them. When they awoke, it was quite dark, and poor little Gretel was afraid, but Hansel comforted her, as he had done before, by telling her they need only wait till the moon rose. "You know, little sister," he said, "that I have thrown breadcrumbs all along the road we came, and they will easily point out the way home." But when they went out of the thicket into the moonlight, they found no breadcrumbs, for the numerous birds which inhabited the trees of the forest had picked them all up. Hansel tried to hide his fear when he made this sad discovery, and said to his sister, "Cheer up, Gretel. I dare say we shall find our way home without the crumbs. Let us try." But this they found impossible. They wandered about the whole night, and the next day from morning till evening, but they could not get out of the wood, and were so hungry that had it not been for a few berries which they picked, they must have starved. At last, they were so tired that their poor little legs could carry them no further. So they laid themselves down under a tree and went to sleep. When they awoke, it was the third morning since they had left their father's house, and they determined to try once more to find their way home. But it was no use. They only went still deeper into the forest and knew that if no help came, they might starve. About noon, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on the branch of a tree and singing so beautifully that they stood still to listen. When he had finished his song, he spread out his wings and flew on before them. The children followed him, till at last they saw at the distance a small house, and the bird flew and perched on the roof. But how surprised were the boy and girl when they came nearer to find that the house was built of gingerbread, of cookies, and ornamented with sweet cakes and candy, while the window was formed of barley sugar. "Oh," exclaimed Hansel, "let us stop here and have a splendid feast. I will have a piece from the roof first, Gretel, and you can eat some of the barley sugar window. It tastes so nice." Hansel reached up on tiptoe, and breaking off a piece of the gingerbread, he began to eat with all his might, for he was very hungry. Gretel seated herself on the doorstep and began munching away at the cakes of which it was made. Presently, a voice came out of the cottage. "Munching, crunching, munching. Who's eating up my house?" Then answered the children, "The wind, the wind, only the wind," and went on eating as if they never meant to leave off without a suspicion of wrong. Hansel, who found the cake on the roof taste very good, broke off another large piece, and Gretel had just taken out a whole pane of barley sugar from the window and seated herself to eat it, when the door opened and a strange-looking old woman came out leaning on a stick. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they let fall what they held in their hands. The old woman shook her head at them and said, "Ah, you dear children, who has brought you here? Come in and stay with me for a little while, and there shall be no harm happen to you. She seized them both by the hands as she spoke, and led them into the house. Milk and pancakes and sugar, apples and nuts, and when evening came, Hansel and Gretel were shown two beautiful little beds with white curtains, and they lay down on them and thought they were in heaven. But although the old woman pretended to be friendly, she was a wicked witch who had her house built of gingerbread on purpose to entrap children. When once they were in her power, she would feed them well till they got fat, and then kill them and cook them for dinner. And this she called her feast day. Fortunately, the witch had weak eyes and could not see very well, but she had a very keen scent. She could smell things, as wild animals have, and could easily discover when human beings were near. As Hansel and Gretel had approached her cottage, she laughed to herself maliciously and said with a sneer, "I have them now. They shall not escape from me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was up, standing by their beds, and when she saw how beautiful they looked in their sleep, with their round, rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself, "What nice tidbits they will be." Then she laid hold of Hansel with her rough hand, dragged him out of bed, and led him to a little cage which had a lattice door, and shut him in. He might scream as much as he would, but it was all useless. After this, she went back to Gretel, and shaking her roughly till she woke, cried, "Get up, you lazy thing, and draw some water, that I may boil something good for your brother, who is shut up in a cage outside till he gets fat. And then I shall cook him and eat him." When Gretel heard this, she began to cry bitterly. But it was all useless. She was obliged to do as the wicked witch told her. For poor Hansel's breakfast, the best of everything was cooked. But Gretel had nothing for herself but a crab's craw. Every morning, the old woman would go out to the little cage. Well, it looks like we did not have enough time today to finish the story. Please come back next week to find out what happened to Hansel and Gretel.